yes, the proposals has been given by different political coalitions, but as members of parliament here, allow people to lobby, as what we have gone through in terms of, election. But in as far as even considering the lobbying, we should not miss the opportunity to be able to see through and make sure that we maintain the same balance as done. I rise to support. Thank you.
Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I also rise to support the report, and I am drawn through this report to Article 19 of the Constitution, and I'm going to read sub-Article 1 and 2. Critically, sub-Article 1 says that the Bill of Rights is an integral part of Kenya's democratic state and is the framework for social, economic, and cultural policies. Sub-Article 2 says that the purpose of recognizing and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms is to preserve the dignity of individuals and communities and to promote social justice and the realization of the potential of all human beings. Mr. Speaker, the day we attempt to suspend these articles, whether by just words or by mere Senator political rhetoric,
consult in Lawton.
The day we attempt to suspend this article, Mr. Speaker, whether by words or political rhetorics, is the day we will condemn all our children to condemnation without relief. I am very disappointed at a senator who has spoken very passionately, profiling sons and daughters of other senior politicians in these countries with regards to this, when we know that when we talk about dynasties today, by virtue that you've gotten an opportunity to be in this house, you are also, you are a politician, and your sons and children will be treated to the same measure that you put. And therefore, I request that as we consider this election coming in on Thursday, please let us consider people on the basis of people who can advance the economic opportunities for our people in the East African market. If you talk about somebody like Winnie Odinga, you might look at the daughter of Raila Amolo Odinga. But Winnie Odinga is also a qualified Drexel University double major graduate. So please respect the Constitution. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Anyeni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise to support the report by the Joint Committee and also urge honorable members in this House that the shortlisted candidates meet the requirements, but we need to shed off the narrative of these slots being a bureau of employment. This House is going to be judged by citizens across the East African community countries by the kind of people we are going to send to that House. Secondly, someone like me would never have made it to this Senate hadn't I been given a platform. So I beg to request that members consider young people, women. So long as you have the capability and qualifications needed, you fit the bill to be in that House. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, and I put the question that pursuant Honorable Senators, at this juncture, I will invite the mover to reply.
Honorable Speaker, I stand here a very proud member of the Joint Select Committee of the two houses. Honorable Speaker, of note is the fact that this committee took into consideration a lot of comments that I've heard from the honorable senators on the floor. Honorable Speaker, As I stand here, I wonder about certain reference to daughters or sons or nepotism or cronyism. Honorable Speaker, this was an advert that was given to Kenyans. And Honorable Speaker, we invited applicants from Kenyans, willing Kenyans who are interested. And Honorable Speaker, those are the applicants that we received. We end up with the final names that we'll be presenting to this House. But Honorable Speaker, are we saying as senators that our children or daughters or whoever they are will never go for seats that they are passionate about? Honorable Speaker, I grew up as a daughter of a teacher. And Honorable Speaker, your parents are the first mentors that you have in the society. I thus became a teacher and a number of my siblings. Are we saying as a House that the Teacher Service Commission was wrong to give me an opportunity to be a teacher? Honorable Speaker, are we saying like the Honorable Senator Boni Alwala is a doctor? Would it be wrong for his son or daughter to be a doctor? Honorable Speaker, let us give chance to willing Kenyans that have made applications and have met the requirements that were so placed. The committee took into consideration regional balance, gender and youth, and shades of opinion also have been taken care of by political parties. I reply, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order 84-2, I do make a determination that this matter does not affect counties and therefore proceed to put the question. That pursuant to the provisions of Article 50 of the Treaty for the Establishment of the East African Community and Rules 13.5 of the East African Legislative Assembly, election of members of the Assembly rules, the Senate adopts the report of the Joint Select Committee on the election of members to the East African Legislative Assembly on its consideration of the nomination papers of the duly nominated candidates for election as members of the East African Legislative Assembly laid on the table of the Senate on Tuesday, 15th November 2022. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order, Clerk.
Order number 10, motion, approval for the Senate to hold a morning sitting on Thursday, 17th November 2022.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Article, yes, sorry, I take that again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move a motion that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order number 34-4B, the Senate resolves to hold a sitting on Thursday, 17th November 2022, commencing at 9:30 a.m. and terminating not later than 2:15 p.m. for purpose of the election of the members of the East African Legislative Assembly and any other business as may be approved by the Senate Business Committee. Mr. Speaker, if you recall the 2017, or rather, I think it was 2017 actually, election, we voted late into the night, and you understand, not primarily because of us as a Senate, because it's only 67 of us. So election and the counting, the whole process of ballot casting and counting doesn't take more than an hour on our side. But on the side of the National Assembly, they counted actually late into the night. And you know that the eventual winners is a joint tally of the votes that one gets in both houses. So you need to conclude our process so that our colleagues in the National Assembly can also carry, I'm sure they also have a similar motion. They'll begin voting on that day in the morning so that by as late as 3, 4, 5 o'clock or even earlier than that, we have known who are the Kenya representatives for the next 5 years to this East African Legislative Assembly. So this is very much a procedural motion, Mr. Speaker, which I want to ask Senator Boni Halwale to second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this being purely a procedural mission, whose reasons have been ably justified by the leader of the minority, I wish to support the leader of the majority. You know, because of his height, I forgot that he's here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to second him and request that the House support the motion on both sides. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, I now propose the question that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 34-4B, the Senate resolves to hold a sitting on Thursday, 17th November 2022, commencing at 9:30 a.m. and terminating not later than 2:15 p.m. for purposes of the election of members to the East African Legislative Assembly and any other business as may be approved by the Senate Business Committee. You may now proceed, Honorable Senators, to make your contributions. Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order 84-2, I do make a determination that this motion does not affect counties and therefore proceed to put the question. That pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 34-4B, the Senate resolves to hold a sitting on Thursday, 17th November 2022, commencing at 9:30 a.m. and terminating not later than 2:15 p.m. for purposes of the election of members of the East African Legislative Assembly and any other business as may be approved by the Senate Business Committee. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 11, motion, effects of upstream activities on the River Tana to the residents of the Tana Delta.
The Honorable Senator Danson Mungatana kindly move your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move this motion that aware that water is a fundamental resource to life
livelihood, food security, and sustainable development and economic good, which is critical for the sustainable development of the country. Further aware that the River Tana plays an important role in the lives of the communities living along its banks, including Garissa and Tana River counties, whose main economic activities are livestock keeping, farming, and fishing. Recognizing Article 43(1)(d) of the Constitution provides that every Kenyan has the right to clean and safe water in adequate quantities, noting that the residents of the Tana River County have perennially suffered from acute effects of flooding and inadequate supply of water to its residents and their livestock, cognizant that the challenge of flooding has predominantly been caused by KenGen's release of huge amounts of water from the Seven Forks dams, which combine with rainwater from the highlands. Further cognizant that the hoarding of water at the Seven Forks dams and other significant upstream activities such as irrigation and small-scale dams limits the amount of water that flows downstream through River Tana, significantly affecting agricultural activities in irrigation schemes such as Bura, Galole, and other small-scale irrigation schemes in the Tana Delta as a result of inadequate water supply to the canals that channel the water to the irrigation schemes. Concerned that limited water supply to the hinterland and irrigation schemes cause severe hunger to the residents of Tana River, death of livestock, and conflicts between farmers and herders, and that floods cause death, displacements, and other challenges like waterborne diseases such as cholera downstream at the Tana Delta. Now, therefore, the Senate urges the Ministry of Water, Sanitation, and Irrigation, in conjunction with the Water Resources Authority, to 1, conduct stakeholder participation before undertaking any major upstream activity, including construction of dams, before release of water during rainy season, and limiting flow of water to River Tana during the dry season. 2, develop a policy in line with the treaty, the Nile Treaty of 1959, to guarantee average annual flow of the River Tana. And 3, come up with mitigation measures to the perennial floods and water scarcity to the residents of Tana Delta. Mr. Speaker, I want to explain the basis of this motion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for many years, the people living downstream the River Tana have suffered and have borne the brunt of the activities that are carried upstream the River Tana. Mr. Speaker, developments have been done upstream, and we have nothing against those developments. But, Mr. Speaker, these developments have had a huge impact on the ecosystem downstream. Mr. Speaker, these developments have caused great losses to the people of the river, those who occupied the river basin in Tana River. And this, Mr. Speaker, affects both the Tana River County and also Garissa County. Mr. Speaker, as the water is moving from the highlands and it's going downstream, Mr. Speaker, the livelihoods of our people depend on what happens with this river. When I was younger, Mr. Speaker, there was flooding of this river. And when this flooding occurs, Mr. Speaker, the water then recedes. And when it recedes, it was a beautiful time of planting. Everybody used to know it is time for planting. And people would go and plant on the rich alluvial soils that have been left by the receding waters of the river. And there will be plentiful of harvest, Mr. Speaker. The Delta used to remove a lot of rice. Nobody used to talk about hunger in the basin of Tana River. Mr. Speaker, it was a time of rejoicing and celebration when the rivers would recede and the people would go to do the planting. Mr. Speaker, this has changed. The livelihoods of many people in the basin has changed completely. Mr. Speaker, the volumes of the water that is coming from upstream going into the sea has receded so much to the level that all those areas that used to be areas where alluvial soils would be deposited and then farming would take place in the traditional manner, these areas, because of the reduced volume of the water that is coming down, Mr. Speaker, the sea has started asserting itself. And when it asserts itself, Mr. Speaker, those lands, they have now become areas of salt deposits. Mr. Speaker, those farmlands have been converted into areas where salt is deposited and therefore no farming takes place. Mr. Speaker, our people have become impoverished. The whole ecosystem that used to exist, life the way it used to be free and happy, it is no longer there because now the whole system has been changed by the power of the sea. Mr. Speaker, the motion is bringing to the attention of the nation and this House, Mr. Speaker, to pronounce itself that the people who are at the bottom have as much right to this water as the people who are upstream. And Mr. Speaker, this motion tries to bring in the whole debate about participation of communities in this country. Mr. Speaker, some communities are so small that their voices are not able to be heard when big programs are being arranged. Mr. Speaker, there is no other way that they will be helped if this Senate does not pronounce itself on this matter. Mr. Speaker, dams have been created upstream. And Mr. Speaker, when it is dry season, we pay the price because there is no water downstream. And Mr. Speaker, when the rainy season begins, like it has now, and the dams are full, and then the water is excess upstream, the only thing they will tell us downstream is that you people need to move to higher ground because we are going to release waters. Mr. Speaker, KenGen in particular has been our greatest enemy downstream. They release these waters with so much energy. Mr. Speaker, you could be sleeping in your house, and then in the morning you find you are not even on your bed. Mr. Speaker, people have lost animals in their thousands, in their hundreds, because water is released, and then when it comes, the communities downstream, they pay the price the second time, that they make huge financial losses. And Mr. Speaker, the question begs, when these programs and when these developments were being done, were there stakeholder participation by communities downstream? Mr. Speaker, the answer is negative. Mr. Speaker, when these projects were being conceived, apparently for the good of the country, were there any benefits that were transferable to the communities downstream? Mr. Speaker, the answer is negative. Mr. Speaker, when these projects were being done, were there environmental impact assessments that were carried? And how were these reports done? Because, Mr. Speaker, when you look at it, none of these environmental impact assessment reports on all these major projects have mentioned the river basin, have mentioned Garissa County or Tana River County. Mr. Speaker, yet we bear the brunt of all the losses that affect us downstream. Mr. Speaker, there are many experts who have studied river ecology, who are experts in lake ecology, and they tell us that the water upstream actually belongs to the people downstream. And Mr. Speaker, if projects are being done upstream, the biggest stakeholders are the people downstream. Mr. Speaker, in none of these projects that have been done on the River Tana, have there been even a delegation of members of parliament who have been there before us, or elders from downstream who have been called to be told, you know, now your river is going to be dammed and this and that is going to happen. None has ever happened. There has been no stakeholder participation. There has been open suppression of the people, Mr. Speaker. And there's been no voice that has been given to those minorities whose lives depends on that river. Mr. Speaker, when we were growing up, there were oxbow lakes. When the river recedes, people used to do a lot of fishing. Mr. Speaker, there's no oxbow lakes anymore. When we were growing up, Mr. Speaker, the river used to move with force. People used to even use it for irrigation downstream. Mr. Speaker, now you will find the river has lost its power. You will find the river is cutting off entire villages because upstream, Mr. Speaker, the volume and the strength of the river has been cut down. And then you will find villages, Mr. Speaker, making homes of thousands of people, ancestral homes. They are cut off because the river comes and then because it does not have power, it starts changing. It goes to the bushes and people are left, whole communities, Mr. Speaker, that never used to know the lack of water. Whole communities that used to know that if I want to shower, I just go to the river. Now, Mr. Speaker, the river changes. And the government of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, has not been there to respond to our people. And the people have continued to be marginalized and impoverished, Mr. Speaker. And nothing has happened. So what this motion, Mr. Speaker, is asking this House is to recognize that we have a right as people who are downstream, as much as those people upstream have a right. And anything that is being done upstream will affect us downstream. And we are Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. We did not come here as refugees. We are Kenyans and we have a right. And we need to be consulted. And Mr. Speaker, this Senate needs to pronounce itself very strongly. The Ministry of Water Irrigation, the Water Resources, the Water Resource Authority, it needs to start looking at the rights of the people who are downstream. So that, Mr. Speaker, everything that is being done upstream, we must be consulted. Mr. Speaker, in this motion, I have sought to bring to the attention of the House that the Anglo-Egyptian agreements that were signed by the British and the Egyptians were to the effect of protecting water sources. Mr. Speaker, 3 agreements were signed, 3 treaties were signed by the British and the colonies that were under the British at that time. And Egypt was seeking to protect, because it is a country that is downstream. The Nile River, Mr. Speaker, starts from Uganda and the areas, and then it moves through Sudan. Not Masai Mara. Mr. Speaker, can you protect
Honorable
me?
Senator Ledama, kindly could we hear the senator in silence, please?
So, Mr. Speaker, it starts from upstream and it goes down to Sudan, then it divides the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and it goes all the way to Egypt. Mr. Speaker, Egypt in many occasions has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, Egypt in many occasions has been prepared to go to war because of its waters. And that is why to sort out these problems, there have been treaties, in fact, 3 treaties that have been signed to protect the volumes of water that are moving upstream and going downstream. Mr. Speaker, the first treaty that was signed, if I may recollect, was in 1903. And in that treaty, Mr. Speaker, Sudan at that time, which was a colony of Britain, was informed that you cannot do any economic or irrigation activities upstream because it will affect the life of Egypt downstream. And Egypt was prepared to go to war. And Mr. Speaker, that is why for a very long time, there has been no irrigation or any works that were being done because of that first treaty. Mr. Speaker, the second treaty and the third treaty, in fact, the 1959 treaty, it actually allocated the volumes of water. How much water would be, is supposed, the million of cubic waters that are supposed to be for Egypt, those ones that are supposed to be for South Sudan, or now the Sudan, and those ones that are supposed to be remaining with Uganda. And Mr. Speaker, the bulk of this water was allocated to Egypt. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in the 1959 treaty, if I may be able to quote it properly, Mr. Speaker, the allocation for Egypt was 55.5 billion cubic waters, or 66% of the volumes of the River Nile. Mr. Speaker, 22% or 18.5 billion cubic waters was allocated to the other colonies. And 12%, Mr. Speaker, was provided for evaporation. But when you look at that treaty and the details within which the provisions of that treaty stated, you see that Egypt, which was the downstream state, was given the bulk or the majority of the water, Mr. Speaker. So we are saying, Mr. Speaker, as we carry out activities of upstream, the River Tana, they should remember in international law, international treaty, the water belongs to the downstream people. The people upstream must use it with that in mind. We don't have, you know, we don't have tanks. We don't have a military of our own. We don't have war machines. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you today, if the people of Tana River were to be given those machines, we would cause war against any person who touches that river. That river is life. That river gives us our identification. Mr. Speaker, I, Danson Mungatana, when I was born in Ngao, Mr. Speaker, my umbilical cord, Mr. Speaker, was cut and thrown in the river. That is the connection, Mr. Speaker, that that river has with the people of the River Tana. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask this Senate, Mr. Speaker, to understand that the river is our life. The river is almost something that is almost connected to some sort of deity. Mr. Speaker, our people are suffering because this river is drying up. The activities upstream are destroying the lives of the people downstream. And Mr. Speaker, the government has